No one recognized him, neither the prison guards, the inmates, nor even the warden, when Ibrahim Traoré disguised himself as an ordinary prisoner and entered Koa prison. What he witnessed would shake him to his core. Just 6 days later, the entire prison system would be turned upside down. Koa prison, located to the east of Ouagadougou, was surrounded by high concrete walls and barbed wire. It was the most notorious institution in Burkina Faso. Behind those grim walls, a separate world existed, one where law and hope seemed to vanish. On a Sunday morning, in the early hours, the heavy iron gates of the prison creaked open to admit another prisoner. Nothing about his entry was unusual. His name was Moussa Dio, a 38-year-old man arrested for a minor robbery attempt. His documents were simple, with no indications of anything out of the ordinary. But what the documents didn't reveal was that this man was, in fact, Ibrahim Traoré, the transitional leader of Burkina Faso, the most powerful person in the country. "Move forward! Hurry up!" the guard barked at the gate without even looking up. Traoré didn't protest. His face bore a few days' worth of stubble, his hair was unkempt, and he wore an old, faded shirt and torn pants. There was nothing about his appearance, his posture, his gaze, or his demeanor that hinted he was a head of state. The reason for his infiltration of Koa prison was simple. For the past 3 months, official prison reports had all been the same. Everything was normal, conditions were improving. Yet anonymous letters sent to Traoré's desk painted a different picture. Torture, starvation, missing prisoners, mysterious deaths. There were 2 conflicting realities inside Koa prison, and Ibrahim Traoré knew there was only one way to discover the truth: to see it with his own eyes. His first hours inside were no different from those of any other new arrival. He was handed a faded, stained prison uniform and led to an empty, crumbling cell block. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, mold and fear, punctuated by the constant shouting of guards. Traoré was assigned to cell block C7, the most feared section of the prison. He sat silently on the lower bunk assigned to him. The mattress was nothing more than a thin sheet of foam, its cover filthy and stained. A single tattered blanket and a pillow as hard as stone completed his accommodations. Around him, the other inmates watched with wary, hostile eyes. In a place like this, every newcomer was a possible threat, an informant, or a dead man walking. "Hey, new guy!" a gruff voice called out from the opposite bunk. Traoré looked up to see a large, broad-shouldered man staring at him, his face marked by old scars and a hardened expression. "How'd you end up here?" "Store robbery," Traoré replied calmly, locking eyes with the man. "An unsuccessful one," he added, offering a faint, crooked smile. "Didn't even have a gun." The big man chuckled darkly and leaned forward. "Guess luck wasn't on your side." His name was Bari, the most powerful inmate in cell block C7. He decided who got to live, who suffered, and who never saw another sunrise. "And you?" Traoré asked, his tone casual but curious. "What brought you down here?" Bari let out a bitter laugh, devoid of warmth. "Little man, I'm no ordinary prisoner. 15 years in this hellhole. Murder, theft, you name it. But my biggest crime?" He grinned coldly. "Getting caught." Traoré's expression darkened. "What's life like in Koa prison?" he asked, the question carrying genuine weight. At that, Bari's smirk vanished. His voice dropped, rough and low. "Life," he repeated. "There is no life here. There's only waiting for death. That's all." As evening fell and the block was swallowed by shadows, a new sound pierced the heavy silence, a soft, pained moan. Traoré turned his head toward the corner of the cell. There, on a rusted bunk, lay a young man, his body reduced to little more than skin and bone, trembling with weakness. The sight made Traoré's stomach tighten. He knew then that the letters hadn't lied. His face was slick with sweat, his eyes glassy and burning with fever. "What happened to him?" Traoré whispered to the inmate beside him. "Gaspard," the old prisoner said softly, his voice heavy with sorrow. The guards beat him 2 weeks ago, cracked his ribs. Nobody looked at him after that. Infection's eaten him from the inside. Doctor? Medicine? Traoré asked. The inmates around him let out bitter, humorless laughs. Doctor? The old man scoffed. There's no doctor here. You get sick, you either crawl back from it or you die. The guards don't care. No one cares. When morning came, the first shock of the day arrived before the cell doors even opened. The guards stormed in, heading straight for Gaspar's bunk. The young man lay motionless, his shallow breaths now gone. Another one gone, muttered head guard Bolot with an indifferent shrug. Get him out. 2 guards grabbed Gaspar's frail body like it was a sack of discarded grain, dragging it away as if it were routine. And here it was. Traoré felt a storm of fury swell in his chest, but he kept his face cold and unreadable. A prisoner's anger was a death sentence. Bolot's gaze swept the cell block, stopping when it reached Traoré. You, new guy, he barked. Kitchen duty. The prison kitchen was just as bleak and filthy as the rest of Koa. A cramped, stifling room filled with rusted pots, rotting food, and desperate prisoners. Traoré was given a cleaver and assigned to chop vegetables, if you could call them that. Most were spoiled, reeking of rot. His sharp eyes caught every detail. The amount of food, the state of the supplies, the unbearable stench. He turned to the old man working beside him. These are rotten, he murmured. How do you cook with this? The old man chuckled darkly. These ain't for us, son, he said, jerking his head toward a cauldron simmering in the corner. That's where our slop goes, boiled gruel and scraps. Traoré glanced to the other side of the kitchen. There, a cook was preparing another pot with actual vegetables and chunks of meat. What's he cooking? Traoré asked. The guards' food, the old man replied, his voice bitter. They eat meat. We eat bones. They get bread. We get mold. That's how it is in here. That night, when Traoré returned to the cell block, Barry was waiting for him. Come here, new guy, Barry said, beckoning him into a dark corner. His eyes glimmered in the dim light. There's things you need to know. They huddled together, speaking in low, cautious voices. At the end of the corridor, Barry began, his voice barely above a whisper. There's a room, a special room. Prisoners who go in there either don't come back or they come back broken. Traoré's jaw clenched, but he remained silent, listening to every word. There's a secret economy here, Barry went on. You bribe for food, you bribe for medicine. Hell, you bribe to stay alive. No money, no family outside. God help you. How long's it been like this? Traoré asked quietly. Always, Barry sighed. But it's worse now. Since Warden Kabor took over last year, everything's rotten. On the 3rd day, Traoré witnessed the brutal truth with his own eyes. Another young prisoner died. But unlike Gaspar, it wasn't sickness that took him. It was the special room. What happened to him? Traoré whispered to Barry that night, as the others slept. Torture, Barry muttered. His family didn't have the cash to pay a bribe. In that room, they've got electric shock machines, iron rods. Worse. You hear the noise at night, don't you? Traoré nodded grimly. He'd heard the muffled screams echoing through the walls. Now he knew where they came from. It was all real, worse than he'd imagined. But one question still gnawed at Traoré. Why? Why would they do this? He asked Barry in a low voice. Barry gave a bitter smile. Money, he said. It's always about money. The ministry sends a budget for every prisoner, but they give us almost nothing. On paper, this place looks like a model prison. In reality, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Traoré's stomach turned. What he suspected was bad, but this was far worse. On the 4th day, it was Traoré's turn. 2 guards grabbed him roughly and dragged him toward the end of the corridor. A hard kick to his stomach knocked the wind out of him. The warden wants to see you, new guy, one of the guards sneered. "Hope you've got a good story." The so-called special room was worse than any nightmare Traoré had envisioned. Bloodstains marked the cracked walls. In one corner lay electric shock machines, iron rods, and other instruments of torture. And in the center of the room, bolted to the floor, was a heavy iron chair fitted with restraints. Warden Kabore entered, his massive frame squeezed into a spotless uniform, his face smug and cruel. In his hand, he held Traoré's fake file. "Musa Dio," Kabore read aloud. "Or whoever you really are, heard you've been asking a lot of questions, talking to Bari. That's dangerous in my prison." "I'm just a prisoner," Traoré replied evenly, keeping his voice calm. "Trying to survive." "Survive?" Kabore sneered. "Around here, survival costs money. You got family, friends who can pay for you." Traoré stayed silent. What Bari had said was true. It was a racket, a business built on suffering. Kabore leaned closer. "Let me explain how it works here. You pay, you eat, you live, you get medicine. Don't pay, well," he gestured toward the electric devices and the blood-streaked chair. "Then we have our fun." "How much?" Traoré asked quietly. "For someone like you?" Kabore grinned. 500,000 CFA. It was more than a year's wages for an ordinary Burkinabe. "And if I don't?" Kabore pointed again at the torture tools. "Then you'll wish you had." Traoré took a steady breath. "Warden Kabore, I think I have an offer for you." Kabore raised a curious eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Before you touch me," Traoré said calmly, "I'd like to show you who I really am. Maybe we can come to an understanding." Kabore burst out laughing. "What are you? A lost prince? A secret millionaire?" Without a word, Traoré reached into the seam of his pocket and drew out a small plastic device, a transmitter concealed by the Secret Service. He pressed a single button. Kabore's grin faltered. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Calling for help," Traoré replied coolly. "And trust me, they're very close." Panic flickered in Kabore's eyes. "Guards, seize him!" But when the heavy door flew open, it wasn't guards who entered. It was masked, heavily armed special forces, Traoré's loyal men. What is this?" Kabore stammered, stumbling backward as the soldiers flooded the room, weapons raised. Who are these men?" Traoré rose to his feet. His posture had changed. The slumped shoulders of a prisoner were gone, replaced by the steady, commanding stance of a leader. His eyes burned with cold authority. "Warden Kabore," he said, his voice calm but sharp as steel. "I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and you are under arrest." Kabore's face drained of color, his legs buckled, and he almost fell. "Impossible," he whispered. "I've heard the allegations," Traoré continued. "The torture, the extortion, the starvation, the deaths, and now I've seen it with my own eyes." The soldiers moved in, restraining Kabore, though the man barely struggled. He was paralyzed by shock. But we were following orders," Kabore stammered. "From the ministry, from the government." "I am the government now," Traoré said coldly, "and the only orders I gave were justice, dignity, and humanity for every Burkinabe citizen." From outside, the roar of helicopter blades filled the air. The prison compound was completely surrounded. "I made you warden," Traoré said, stepping closer, "and now you'll be my first prisoner." Panic rippled through the corridors. Guards dropped their weapons, some raising their hands in surrender, others desperately trying to flee. Order collapsed in minutes as justice came crashing down on Koa prison. The attempt to escape failed. When the heavy doors of cell block C7 swung open, the prisoners inside froze in astonishment. There, standing between armed, uniformed soldiers, was Traoré. But he was no longer the wary, beaten inmate they'd known. He stood tall, his gaze steady, his voice firm, his entire bearing that of a head of state. "Bakari!" Traoré called to his former cellmate. Bari's throat tightened. His voice faltered. You really—" "Yes," Traoré answered. "And every story you told, every injustice I heard in these walls, they matter. Now it's time for justice." Over the next days, Traoré moved through every corner of Kotoka prison. What he witnessed sickened him. Torture chambers, starving inmates, bodies wasting away in filth and darkness. He documented everything, every prisoner's name, every guard's crime, every forgotten soul. Then he gave the order. "On Saturday," he said to his officers, "everyone will gather in the yard, prisoners, guards, administrators." A Secret Service agent hesitated. "Sir, will there be executions?" Traoré shook his head. "Number, there will be justice, and justice is stronger than revenge." When Saturday came, the rising sun cast a harsh light over the prison yard. On one side, gaunt and desperate prisoners. On the other, guards and officials, stripped of their power, fear etched into their faces. Traoré stood before them not in military regalia, but in plain clothes, the same way he'd arrived 6 days earlier. Beside him stood ministers, generals, and members of his government. "Today," Traoré began, his voice carrying across the silent yard, "Burkina Faso makes a choice. Will we stand with the oppressed or with the oppressors? Are we not guilty if we watch injustice and do nothing?" A heavy silence followed. Some guards lowered their heads. In the prisoners' eyes flickered a fragile spark, hope. "I am closing Kotoka prison," Traoré declared. "This place of shame will be torn down. In its place we will build a rehabilitation and education center, a place for healing, not torment." He gestured toward Warden Kabore and his men, now shackled and pale. "These men will face a fair trial, and when I say fair, I don't mean the justice you practiced here. I mean real justice." A guard began to weep. Another collapsed to his knees. "All prisoners will receive medical care," Traoré continued. "The sick will be treated, the starving will eat, every case will be reviewed, no one will be forgotten." Bakari watched, his eyes damp with disbelief. "Is this real?" he whispered. "It's real," Traoré said, his gaze unwavering. "Because Burkina Faso will no longer bury its truths. We will face them." Weeks later, Kotoka prison was unrecognizable. Its walls had crumbled, barbed wire removed. In its place stood an open campus, an education and rehabilitation center. The notorious special room had become a library. The rotten kitchen transformed into a clean, communal soup kitchen, and in the same yard where horrors once unfolded, former inmates gathered. Bakari was there too, now a health officer tending to others, as once no one had tended to him. "The president is coming today," he told the others, a grin on his face. "We have to thank him." When Ibrahim Traoré arrived, he wore simple clothes again, no uniform, no decorations. But this time he walked as a leader known to his people, one of them, never having forgotten his roots. "A nation's prisons," Traoré said to the assembled crowd, "are its mirror. And today, when we look in that mirror, we see pride, not shame." He shook hands with former prisoners. In the crowd, a young man stepped forward. It was Gaspar, now recovered, eyes no longer feverish, skin no longer pale. "Mr. President," Gaspar said, voice trembling, "you saved my life." Traoré shook his head. "No, Gaspar, we saved each other. A nation is only as strong as its weakest." Bakari and other former prisoners surrounded him. "In our land," Bakari murmured, remembering an old proverb, "no one applauds their ruler standing, but everyone embraces their brother." And that day, in what had once been Burkina Faso's most feared prison, an embrace began. A leader embracing his people, and a nation beginning to embrace its future. The Kotoka incident, as it came to be known, sparked a wave of reforms across the country. Warden Kabore and his accomplices were fairly tried and punished. But more importantly, Traoré's 6 days in that secret prison carried a message far beyond its walls. No Burkinabe, even behind bars, would be forgotten again. In an interview years later, Traoré would say, "Real power is protecting the weak. Real leadership is feeling your people's pain, and real freedom comes only when justice belongs to everyone." The story was told far beyond Burkina Faso's borders, across Africa, a story of one leader's journey through darkness to bring his nation into the light.